While my family was celebrating Christmas Eve on December 24th, 2023, my 8-year-old grandson whispered in my ear that he had seen my wife sneaking out of the house during dinner and entering the neighbor's residence. I never imagined that those innocent words would trigger the calculated destruction of a 36-year marriage. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, because we have new stories. Every day, leave a like and tell us in the comments what city you are watching from. My name is William, and I am 64 years old. For more than 3 decades, I built a life that I believe was solid, alongside Emily, my wife of 58 years. We raised our son Jason, who is now 35, and we enjoyed our time with our grandson Luke, a brilliant and observant boy who had just turned 8. We lived in a spacious house in the suburbs of Chicago, a property I inherited from my father in 1998, valued at approximately $9 million. I had worked all my life as a civil engineer until I retired 4 years ago, and thanks to the inheritance from my mother who passed away in 2015, we had investments exceeding $3 million. On paper, we were the perfect portrait of a prosperous and united family. That Christmas Eve began like all the ones before it. The house was decorated with warm lights, the aroma of roast lamb filled the dining room, and the table was overflowing with traditional dishes that Emily had been preparing for days. Jason was there with his wife Sarah and little Luke, along with my sister Betty and her family. The conversation flowed between laughter and memories, while the red wine circulated generously. Emily seemed especially animated that night, wearing a new navy blue dress that I did not remember seeing her wear before. Her freshly styled hair and a perfume different from her usual one should have alerted me, but at that moment I only thought she had dressed up for the family celebration. Approximately at 10 p.m., while we were all absorbed in a conversation about New Year's plans, I noticed that Emily got up discreetly from the table. "I am going to the bathroom for a moment," she said naturally, and no one paid much attention. I continued chatting with my brother-in-law about politics when I felt a small tug on my sleeve. It was Luke with those dark and intelligent eyes that always seemed to capture more than a child should. "Grandpa, can I speak with you for a moment alone?" he asked me in a low voice. His serious tone surprised me. I excused myself from the table, and we walked together toward the sunroom that overlooks the back garden. The December cold hit my face when I opened the sliding door. Luke was shivering slightly in his reindeer Christmas sweater. "What is wrong, champ?" I asked him, kneeling down to be at his eye level. The boy looked back, ensuring that no one could hear us, and then he released the words that would destroy my world. "Grandpa. Grandma left the house a while ago. I saw her from the upstairs window when I went to get my gift. She walked fast toward a Mr. David's house, the neighbor 3 houses down. It is not the first time I have seen her do that." My heart stopped. David was our neighbor for 5 years, a divorced man of 52 who worked as an architect. He had always been cordial in casual neighborhood encounters. We had even shared some dinners between neighbors. His wife had left him 2 years ago, and since then he lived alone in that modern house. "Are you sure about what you saw?" "Luke?" I asked him, trying to keep my voice steady, although I felt the ground moving beneath my feet. The boy nodded solemnly. "Yes, Grandpa, and it is not just today. Last month, when I stayed to sleep over on a Wednesday because Mom and Dad went to the theater, I also saw her go out at night when you were asleep. I thought about telling you, but I did not know if it was wrong. Today I decided to tell you because she seemed very hurried and nervous." I hugged my grandson tightly, feeling my throat close up. "You did the right thing telling me, champ. You are very brave and observant. But I need this to stay between us for now, okay? It is very important that you do not tell anyone else, not even Mom or Dad. Can you do that for me?" Luke nodded seriously. "I promise, Grandpa. Are you okay?" "You look pale." "I'm fine. I just need some fresh air." I lied. "Go back inside and enjoy dinner." "I will come in a moment." The boy returned to the dining room, and I stayed in the sunroom with my hands shaking and my mind racing. I looked at my watch, 10:17 p.m. Emily had been gone for almost 20 minutes. A visit to the bathroom does not take that long. All the pieces began to fit in my head like a macabre puzzle. Her frequent outings with friends in recent months, the new interest in her physical appearance, the smiles when checking her cell phone, the changed passwords on her devices that we used to share freely. I made a decision in that instant. I could not stay paralyzed by suspicion. I needed to confirm or deny what my grandson had just revealed to me. I put on the dark coat that hung by the back door and went out into the garden, circling the house from the side so as not to be seen from the dining room. The street was deserted and silent, illuminated barely by street lamps that cast long shadows on the wet asphalt. I walked quickly past the 3 houses that separated us from David's residence, with my heart beating violently against my ribs. David's house had the lights on downstairs. The curtains in the main living room were partially open. I approached cautiously, staying in the shadows of the front garden, and what I saw through that window will be etched in my memory until the day I die. Emily was there, sitting on the beige leather sofa, wearing the navy blue dress she had worn during dinner. But she was not alone. David was next to her, and they were kissing with a passion and an intimacy that are only built with time and repetition. It was not an accidental or confused kiss. It was the kiss of 2 people who knew each other deeply, who shared a hidden complicity. His hands roamed my wife's back while she caressed his face with familiarity. I felt nausea, rage, disbelief. But instead of bursting into that house screaming and letting myself be carried away by impulse, something inside me turned cold and calculating. I took my cell phone out of my coat pocket and began to record. For 7 minutes I captured every moment of that betrayal. The kisses, the caresses, the words I could hear through the glass. "I missed you so much this week. I heard Emily say, 'I missed you too, my love.'" "I hate that you have to go back to him," David replied. Every word was a stab wound, but I kept the phone steady, recording every second. When I had enough evidence, I backed away in silence and returned home by the same path. I entered through the back door, took off my coat, washed my face with ice-cold water in the guest bathroom, and went back to the dining room as if nothing had happened. 5 minutes later, Emily returned with a radiant smile. Sorry for the delay. I ran into Betty in the hallway and we started chatting. She lied with chilling naturalness. No one questioned her absence except me, who now observed her with completely different eyes. The woman who had shared 36 years of my life, who had slept beside me for more than 13,000 nights, was a complete stranger. That night, while everyone toasted to family and health, I toasted silently to something completely different. To justice, to the coldness I had just discovered inside me, and to the certainty that there would be no forgiveness or reconciliation for this betrayal. The rest of that Christmas Eve passed like a theatrical performance, in which I was the only actor aware of playing a role. I returned to the dining room with the mobile phone kept in the inside pocket of my jacket, feeling the weight of those images as if they were hot stones against my chest. Emily was back and chatting animatedly with my sister Betty about a pie recipe with that ease that I now recognized as the perfect mask of an expert liar. I sat in my usual place at the head of the table, and I observed. I really observed for the first time in months, perhaps years. Every gesture of Emily acquired a completely different meaning under this new light. The way she distractedly touched her phone every few minutes, checking messages quickly before putting it away. The particular shine in her eyes when she smiled, an expression that I had naively attributed to family happiness. The automatic excuse she offered when Jason asked why she took so long getting ready that afternoon. "At my age, one needs more preparation to look presentable," she had said with false modesty, while Sarah laughed understandingly. All were lies woven with mastery. How long had she been perfecting this deception? Luke had mentioned seeing her go out at least one more time the previous month during a night he stayed at the house. That meant the infidelity was not recent or sporadic. It was systematic, planned, sustained over time with absolute premeditation. "Are you okay, William? You are very quiet tonight?" asked Sarah Jason's wife, with genuine concern in her voice. Everyone turned toward me. Emily looked at me with those brown eyes that once made me feel loved. Now I only saw interrogation, and perhaps a flash of uneasiness. "Perfectly," I replied, raising my glass of wine. "I was just reflecting on how lucky we are to be all gathered together. Family is the most valuable thing we have, right? Loyalty, trust, shared years, all that builds something that should be unbreakable." The words floated in the air with a weight that only I understood. Emily held my gaze for 3 eternal seconds before smiling and nodding. "You are absolutely right, darling. 36 years together are a treasure." The ease with which she pronounced those words, knowing that she had just been kissing another man 30 minutes earlier, revealed a chilling truth to me. I did not know at all the woman with whom I had shared more than half of my existence. The dinner continued. Dessert was served. We exchanged gifts. We sang carols while Luke played enthusiastically with a new tambourine. I participated mechanically, smiling, when appropriate nodding at the right moments. But my brain was functioning on a completely different plane. I mentally reviewed the last 12 months, looking for signs I should have detected. February 2023. Emily started going to the gym 3 times a week, something she had never done before. "I need to take better care of myself. Age does not forgive," she said. She lost 15 pounds in 4 months and completely renewed her wardrobe. I celebrated it as a positive change. I even encouraged her. What an idiot I was. April 2023. She started going out frequently with a group of friends from the book club. She would arrive after 11 at night, smelling of wine and expensive perfume with flushed cheeks, and prepared excuses about how entertaining the literary discussions were. She never mentioned the name of a single one of those friends, nor the title of any book discussed. June 2023. She changed the passwords on her phone and laptop. When I asked casually, she replied, "I got a security alert recommending I update them. Didn't you get one?" I accepted the explanation without questioning it because I trusted her blindly. August 2023. During our vacation on the coast, she spent hours sending messages from her phone. "It is Betty. She is having problems with her teenage son and needs to vent," she explained. I was enjoying the sun on the beach, not suspecting that she was probably writing to David, feeding that clandestine relationship, even when we were traveling together. All those memories paraded through my mind while I cut the pie and served portions to the guests. My sister Betty accepted her plate, chatting about her own Christmas plans, oblivious to the fact that her name had been used as an alibi in Emily's web of lies. How many other innocent people had been involved without knowing it in this theater of falsehoods? Approximately at 1 in the morning, the guests began to say goodbye. I hugged each one at the door, wishing them happy holidays with a cordiality that sprang from autopilot. Luke winked at me discreetly before leaving with his parents, a complicit gesture that reminded me of our pact of silence. That 8-year-old boy had shown more integrity and courage that night than the 58-year-old woman I was married to. When we finally were alone, Emily began to clear plates and glasses with unusual energy for the late hour. "It was a beautiful evening, right? Everyone seemed very happy," she commented, carrying a tray to the kitchen. I followed her in silence, watching how she hummed a melody while rinsing the silverware. How could she be so calm, so sure that her secret remained intact? "Leave it for tomorrow," I suggested with a neutral voice. "It is late and you are tired. You are right. I will just put the perishables in the refrigerator and go up." She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, a gesture so routine and empty, like all the ones we had exchanged for months without me noticing. She went up the stairs toward our room, while I remained in the kitchen, listening to her footsteps on the upper floor. I took out my phone and reviewed the recorded video. The quality was sharp, the audio clear, the evidence was undeniable. I copied the file to 3 different locations: my personal cloud, a USB drive that I kept in my study briefcase, and I sent it encrypted to my own secondary email. I could not risk losing this proof. Then I went up to the room. Emily was already in her nightgown, removing her makeup in front of the vanity mirror. Our gazes met in the reflection. "Are you sure you're okay? I noticed you were distant during dinner." She insisted with a worried tone that I now identified as calculated acting. "Just exhausted," I lied, getting into bed without changing. "It was a long day." "It was," she agreed, turning off the light and lying down next to me. "Good night, darling." "Good night, Emily." I remained awake in the dark for hours, listening to her regular breathing, which indicated she was sleeping peacefully. She rested without remorse while I began to design every move of my counterattack. There would be no emotional explosions or hasty confrontations. I had learned something crucial that night. Coldness defeats passion and strategy overcomes impulse. Emily had played her hand with patience for months. Now it was my turn, and I had a fundamental advantage that she did not know about. I knew exactly what cards my opponent held. I woke up at 7 in the morning on December 25th, after barely 3 hours of fragmented sleep. Emily continued sleeping deeply beside me with that serene expression that was obscene, considering what she had done the night before. I got dressed in silence, went down the stairs, and made coffee in the Italian machine she had given me for our 30th anniversary. The irony of using that object in this moment did not go unnoticed. With the steaming cup in hand, I locked myself in my study on the second floor, a spacious room with oak shelves full of technical engineering books and documents accumulated during 40 years of professional career. I locked the door, closed the thick curtains, and sat in front of the desk where I had designed projects worth millions. Now I needed to design something completely different, the absolute protection of my assets and dignity. I turned on the computer and opened the digital folder where I kept all our important financial documents. During the next 90 minutes, I performed a meticulous inventory of our economic situation, something I had not reviewed in detail since my retirement 4 years ago. The house where we lived was valued at $9 million, according to the latest municipal appraisal of 2022. But here came the crucial detail that Emily had probably forgotten or never fully understood. The property was registered solely in my name since 1998, when I inherited it after my father passed away. We never transferred it to joint ownership because at that time our marriage operated under separate property regime, a modality we maintained on the advice of our notary back then. That meant that legally it was a separate asset of mine, not shared. The investments constituted the second pillar of assets, $3,100,000, distributed in index funds, government bonds, and stocks of stable companies. These resources came entirely from the inheritance I received when my mother died in 2015. I had managed those funds personally since then using a broad power of attorney for asset management that Emily signed in 2016 during a routine notary procedure. She had stamped her signature without reading the details, trusting fully in me. That power of attorney allowed me to move, transfer, and reorganize those investments without requiring her additional authorization. Finally, there were the joint bank accounts that totaled $740,000. This was the only truly shared asset accumulated through savings from my salary during decades and small contributions from Emily when she worked as a language teacher until her retirement 7 years ago. I did quick calculations. Of the total assets of approximately $12,840,000, only $740,000 were subject to division in case of divorce. The rest, more than 94%, remained legally protected as inherited separate property. Emily was unaware of these technical details. She had always trusted me to handle the finances while she enjoyed the benefits without getting involved in the bureaucracy. Now that lack of interest played in my favor. I printed key documents, deeds to the house with the inheritance record certificates of the investments showing origin in maternal inheritance, The Notary Power of Attorney from 2016. I kept everything in a leather folder that I locked with a small padlock, whose key I carried with me. After that, I leaned back in the reading chair by the window and allowed my mind to go back chronologically, looking for the exact moment when everything began to crumble without me noticing. January 2023, 11 months ago. Emily returned from a supposed vacation with her cousin in Florida, full of renewed energy. I needed that rest, she declared. She started to show herself physically distant, rejecting intimate approaches with excuses about tiredness or headaches. In retrospect, it was probably when she met David at some neighborhood social event that I did not attend because I was visiting Jason. March 2023. I noticed evident changes in her routine, more frequent outings, renewed interest in her appearance, high expenses on clothes, and aesthetic treatments, that she justified saying, "I deserve it," after years taking care of everyone. I applauded her self-esteem without imagining she was dressing up to impress another. May 2023. During Jason's birthday dinner, I observed that Emily exchanged several glances with David, who had been invited for being a close neighbor of Jason too. At that moment, I interpreted it as simple social courtesy. Now I understood that complicity already existed between the two, developing before my own eyes, while I remained blind. July 2023. Emily insisted on completely renovating our bedroom. New paint, modern furniture, luxurious bedding. "We need freshness in our life," she argued. I spent $18,000 on that remodeling that she directed with unusual enthusiasm. Now I wondered if that change sought to symbolically erase our shared past to accommodate her new divided reality. October 2023. I proposed traveling together to Italy for our 36th anniversary. She declined, claiming she preferred something quieter without pressures of tourist itineraries. We celebrated with a discreet dinner at home. How convenient it was to avoid long trips when she maintained a local romance that required constant availability. Each memory was one more piece of the puzzle that finally acquired complete shape. It had not been my carelessness nor natural deterioration of the marriage. It had been deliberate replacement, calculated substitution, where I was being displaced while David occupied emotional and physical spaces that previously belonged to me. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Emily called softly at the study door. "William, are you there?" "I made breakfast. I will be down in 10 minutes," I replied with a neutral tone. "I am reviewing some pending documents. On Christmas Day." "Rest a little, darling." The feigned worry in her voice made me nauseous. I waited until her footsteps moved away. Then I took out my personal phone and drafted 2 important messages. The first for Mike, my lawyer and friend for 30 years. "Mike, I need urgent and confidential meeting. Delicate family matter. Available tomorrow the 26th. The second for Robert, a private investigator, recommended by a colleague years ago. "Robert, I require discreet professional services. Spousal investigation contact, urgently." Both responded in less than 20 minutes, confirming availability. The machinery was in motion. I went down to the dining room where Emily had prepared toast, homemade jam, and freshly squeezed orange juice. We had breakfast while she commented animatedly about how successful the dinner was. I nodded, smiled, mechanically answered in monosyllables. She did not detect anything abnormal because she never paid true attention to my emotional states. She only saw what she wanted to see. That morning I understood something fundamental. I would not confront until I had absolute control of the situation. No premature explosions or reproaches. I would build an armored legal case. I would protect every dollar earned with my effort. I would accumulate irrefutable evidence and only then reveal my knowledge. Emily had played with patience for almost a year. I could surpass that patience and turn it into her doom. December 26th dawned gray and cold. Emily decided to visit a friend according to what she said, which provided me exactly what I needed: time and privacy to execute my first strategic movements. I waited until her car disappeared down the avenue before taking my vehicle keys and driving toward Mike's law firm in downtown Chicago. Mike received me personally in his office on the 5th floor, an elegant space with large windows offering panoramic views of the city. We had 3 decades of friendship built on professional cases, chess games on Sundays, and a mutual trust that was invaluable in moments like this. His expression changed from cordial to serious when he saw my face. "William, you look terrible." "What has happened?" he asked, pointing to one of the leather armchairs in front of his solid mahogany desk. Without preambles, I took out my phone and played the video recorded 2 nights ago. Mike watched in absolute silence for the full 7 minutes. When it finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "I'm so sorry, my friend. This must be devastating for you." His empathy was genuine, but I also noticed how his legal brain began to process information. "How long have you suspected it?" I confirmed the infidelity on Christmas Eve. My grandson Luke alerted me to suspicious behaviors. Before that, I spent months ignoring evidence signals. I extended the folder with asset documentation on the desk. I need to protect everything I built. I want to know exactly what is legally vulnerable and what remains untouchable. Mike opened the folder and began to review every document with the thoroughness that characterized him. 20 minutes passed, during which only the rustle of papers and occasional murmurs were heard while he took notes on his yellow pad. "This simplifies the situation enormously from a legal point of view," he declared finally. "The house is registered as paternal inheritance exclusively in your name since 1998. The certificates confirm that you operate under a separate property regime since the marriage. That converts the house into a separate asset, not subject to division. And the investments I inquired, same scenario. Verifiable origin in maternal inheritance from 2015. Managed through valid power of attorney signed by Emily in 2016. You have legal authorization to move those funds without requiring her additional consent." Mike paused, his fingers drumming on the desk. "The only shared finances are the joint bank accounts. Those $740,000 would indeed be subject to equitable division in a divorce process. But I have proof of adultery," I pointed out. "That changes things." Mike nodded with a calculating expression. "Substantially, proven adultery can influence economic compensation. If you also demonstrate that she used shared funds to finance the extramarital relationship, you could claim restitution. We need to track bank movements of the last 12 months, transfers, abnormal withdrawals, unjustified expenses." I took out a notebook where I had written down figures remembered from recent account statements. "I have noticed several large withdrawals. One of $15,000 in March, another of $22,000 in June, $14,000 in September. Emily always justified saying they were gifts for relatives or personal investments in friends' projects. I never questioned because I trusted fully. I will request detailed bank statements for the entire year of 2023, said Mike, writing quickly. If those amounts ended up benefiting the lover, it constitutes misappropriation of marital resources. It strengthens your position dramatically. We discussed strategies for the next hour. Mike recommended moving the inherited investments to individual accounts. To avoid any future claim, withdraw a significant percentage from the joint accounts, leaving a reasonable amount, and document absolutely everything. He also suggested hiring a professional investigator to build solid files on the duration and nature of the adultery. I know someone exceptional, I mentioned. Robert, do you remember him? Excellent choice. I worked with him on a corporate fraud case 2 years ago, discreet, efficient, and his reports are admissible in court due to their technical rigor. Mike closed his pad and looked directly at me. William, this is going to be painful, not only emotionally, but also logistically. You will have to maintain absolute normality at home while we build the case. Can you do it? I can, and I will, I affirmed with a determination that surprised even myself. She acted for months, maybe more than a year. I can act for a few weeks. I left the law firm with renewed clarity. Mike would initiate procedures to secure legal documentation while I coordinated with Robert. I drove directly toward the outskirts where the investigator had his office in a discreet commercial building. Robert was a man of 45 athletic build, piercing gaze that conveyed immediate professional competence. His office was Spartan metal desk computers with multiple screens, shelves with sophisticated technical equipment. I showed him the same video Mike had seen. Robert analyzed it with a clinical eye, stopping at specific moments, enlarging images, evaluating angles. Compelling material, he commented. Excellent image quality. Clear audio, unequivocal context. What do you need exactly? I want to know everything, I replied. When it started, how often they meet, if there is monetary exchange, if they plan a future together. I need evidence that destroys any attempt to minimize this as a passing fling without importance. Robert nodded, taking notes on a digital tablet. Complete surveillance of both subjects for 45 days. Physical tracking pattern analysis, documentary, photography, if possible, intervention of digital communications through legal methods. Do you have access to her phone or computer? Limited? She changed all her passwords recently. It does not matter, there are alternative ways. My fees are $5,000 per week plus operating expenses. For 45 days, we are talking about approximately $35,000 total. I did not hesitate. I accept. When can you start? Tomorrow. I need recent photographs of both exact addresses, known routines, vehicle makes, and license plates. Robert slid a contract form across the desk. Sign here and provide a 50% advance. You will receive weekly reports with update of findings. I signed without reading details. I transferred $17,500 from my personal account via online banking. The money was irrelevant compared to what was at stake. My dignity, my assets, my right to the full truth. I left that office feeling that I was regaining control over my life. Emily believed she had everything under dominion, managing two simultaneous realities without consequences. She was unaware that her carefully built world was beginning to crumble from the foundations. The following 45 days were the strangest and most exhausting of my existence. Maintaining a facade of marital normality, while I knew exactly what Emily did every afternoon, required an emotional discipline I did not know I possessed. We had breakfast to dinner occasionally like the conventional couple we no longer were. She never suspected that every outing of hers was photographically documented. Each meeting with David was recorded in the file that grew weekly. Robert worked with relentless efficiency. The first report arrived on January 5th, 2024, barely 8 days after hiring him. It contained 27 pages with high-resolution photographs showing 3 meetings between Emily and David during that week. Tuesday, January 3rd. Lunch at an Italian restaurant 25 miles from our neighborhood, obviously selected for its safe distance. Thursday, January 5th. Entry to a boutique hotel on the outskirts, where they remained 3 hours and 17 minutes. Saturday, January 7th. Visit by Emily to David's house while I supposedly took a nap. The images were irrefutable. Emily arriving at the restaurant with a red dress I did not know, kissing David on the lips before entering. Both leaving the hotel with relaxed expressions, holding hands. David opening the door of his residence to receive my wife, who entered with the familiarity of someone who knows that space perfectly. The second report on January 12th added 32 more pages. Robert had managed to photograph exchanges of gifts, David delivering a small box that turned out to be a white gold bracelet valued at $3,200, according to subsequent investigation at the jewelry store. Emily reciprocated by gifting him a Swiss watch, whose price we found out was $4,800. Where did that money come from? From our shared account, naturally, But the most devastating material arrived with the third report on January 19th. Robert had obtained through methods he preferred not to detail completely access to Emily's bank transfer records for the last 14 months. The analysis revealed a systematic pattern that left me breathless. October 2022. First transfer of $5,000 to David's account with the concept friendly loan. November 2022. $8,000 same concept. December 2022. $3,500. The pattern continued month after month without interruption until November 2023. Total accumulated. $62,300 transferred from our joint account toward the lover during 14 consecutive months. $62,300. Money that I earned with 4 decades of engineering work, saving meticulously, investing with prudence. Money that Emily extracted systematically to finance her betrayal, buying David's affection with resources that did not belong exclusively to her. I reviewed every justification she had offered during that period. My cousin needs help with medical expenses. Lie. The friends from the club organized a solidarity fund for charity. Lie. I invested in Sarah's business, which promised good returns. Lie after lie after lie, pronounced with chilling naturalness, while she emptied our finances to feed her affair. The fourth report, on January 26th, incorporated audio recordings obtained legally through a device placed in David's car with his tricked consent, Robert posing as an insurance technician. The captured conversations were devastating, not only for their romantic content, but for the explicit discussions about a shared future. When I finally divorce William, we can be together openly, Emily said in a recording from January 24th. He is so naive he does not even suspect anything. He is completely absorbed in his books and boring documentaries. When do you plan to ask him for the divorce? Asked David. Not yet. I need to make sure of the financial situation first. The house is worth millions, and we have considerable investments. I must consult with a lawyer to know exactly what corresponds to me legally before moving. Hearing those words in my wife's voice, coldly, discussing how to dismantle our marriage while calculating economic benefits, was the final blow that eliminated any vestige of doubt or compassion I might harbor. The fifth report on February the 2nd arrived with 140 accumulated pages. Robert had tracked the origin of the relationship to October 2022, confirmed by testimonies from employees of the gym, where both coincided initially. Photographs of entry logs showed that Emily and David began attending at identical times since October 16th of that year. 15 full months of sustained infidelity, planned and financed with my money. The sixth and final report, delivered on February 9th, completed the dossier, with 240 total pages. It included a detailed chronology of 53 documented meetings, analysis of communication patterns, via cell tower triangulation, confirming constant physical proximity, testimonies from waiters and hotel receptionists who recognized the couple as regular clients, and projections of total expenses incurred by Emily in the relationship. $87,000 summing direct transfers, gift strips, and services. $87,000 of family resources evaporated in betrayal. 15 months of accumulated lies. 53 meetings while I worked, rested, or simply trusted blindly in the woman with whom I shared a roof. During those 45 days, I also executed parallel movements under Mike's guidance. On January 30th, I transferred the $3,100,000 of inherited investments toward an individual account in a different bank using the valid power of attorney Emily had signed years ago. She never checked those financial statements, trusting fully in my management. On February 3rd, I withdrew $500,000 from the joint accounts, leaving $240,000 as reserve. I justified the movement to Emily, saying I was diversifying investments to take advantage of market opportunities. She nodded without real interest, her mind probably occupied planning her next getaway with David. Parallelly, Mike discreetly contacted an investment firm that had been looking for premium properties in our area for 6 months. I initiated preliminary negotiations for the sale of the inherited house, without signing anything yet, but preparing the ground for a quick move when the precise moment arrived. On the night of February 9th, with the complete file in my hands, I sat in my study and reread every page. 240 sheets of documented betrayal, supported by bank records, testimonies from third parties, and audio recordings. It was an airtight case, indestructible, lethal. Emily continued sleeping calmly every night, oblivious to the siege that was closing methodically around her. With the complete dossier on the table, I understood that the moment had arrived to move from the observation phase to silent execution. It was no longer just about knowing who Emily was cheating on me with, or how long she had been doing it, but deciding what price she was going to pay for every lie, for every dollar, diverted for every night I slept alone without knowing it. On February 10th, 2024, I met again with Mike in his office. I placed the 240 pages, ordered by dates and categories, in front of him. He took almost an hour to review the key points, passing quickly through the photographs, and stopping with greater attention on the bank transfers and conversation transcripts. "This is legal dynamite," he stated upon finishing. "Not only can we demonstrate sustained adultery, but also improper use of marital society funds for the benefit of a third party. It is the perfect combination to justify you keeping the totality of your separate assets and claiming part of what would legally be divisible." "I want something very clear," I replied. "When this ends, Emily must not have access to the house, nor the inherited capital. I will accept a limited amount, proceeding from the joint accounts, nothing more, and let there be formal record of her conduct. I do not want ambiguities that allow future reinterpretations." Mike nodded. "Then the next step is to close the sale of the home. While this property remains in your name, she will be able to consider it a status symbol, even if legally it does not correspond to her. If we transform it into liquidity under your exclusive control before open conflict, we drastically reduce her expectations." I signed the necessary documents for the investment company to present a formal offer. They had already visited the property twice under the pretext of appraisal, for insurance updates, without Emily suspecting anything. 3 days later, on February 13th, we received a written proposal, $8,900,000, with a vacancy term of 60 days, after signing an immediate transfer of the amount to the indicated account. I accepted without hesitating. On February 14th, while Emily prepared for what was supposedly a dinner with friends for Valentine's Day, I was sitting in a notary office in downtown Chicago, signing the public deed that transferred my father's house to the hands of the investment society. Mike supervised every clause. The money was sent in a single operation to an individual account newly opened in my name at a different entity. No bank notification would arrive at the physical mail of the house. All communications would be digital and private. I left the notary at 7 p.m. with the strange sensation of having closed a chapter of my life without having moved a box. The home was still standing, the furniture in its place, the family photos hanging on the walls. However, legally it no longer belonged to us. It was a foreign structure we occupied temporarily by contract, although Emily ignored it completely. That night, while she finished applying makeup in front of the mirror, I leaned on the doorframe of the bedroom and observed her carefully. She wore a tight black dress she rarely used with me, long silver earrings, and that intense perfume that had become her usual scent for a year. "You look very elegant for a simple dinner with friends," I commented, measuring her reaction. "It is a new restaurant downtown, quite formal," she explained without wavering. "Besides, it is exciting to dress up a little once in a while. You wouldn't want a sloppy wife, right?" "I see," I replied with neutrality. What time do you plan to return? Not too late, she replied while applying lipstick. Around 12 at the most. I knew, thanks to Robert's tracking, that in reality she would meet David at a luxury hotel near the city center. I even knew the approximate room number they usually requested. She left the house at 8 o'clock sharp. The soft slam she gave when leaving sounded to me like a definitive seal on our past. During her absence, I started to discreetly organize what would be my new life. I opened the closet where I kept personal documents and selected the essentials: titles of inherited property, already sold certificates of investments, now under exclusive control, Robert's file photo albums I wanted to keep, and some objects of sentimental value like my father's pocket watch. I placed everything in 2 medium-sized suitcases that I hid at the back of the storage room, prepared to leave in a matter of hours when it was necessary. The next morning, February 15th, Mike informed me that the total transfer of the sale amount was already confirmed in the new account: $8,900,000 added to the $3,100,000 from the inherited investments, and the rest of reserves consolidated my economic base out of Emily's reach. The joint accounts, now reduced to approximately $240,000, would remain as the only shared terrain to discuss. The next movement consisted of formally preparing the divorce demand. Mike drafted a document of more than 30 pages describing chronologically Emily's conduct, attaching copies of the main proofs, fragments of the Christmas Eve video bank statements, with transfers to David, transcripts of conversations where they spoke of a common future, financed with our assets, summary reports of the private investigation. When we present this explained, Mike the judge will understand that this is not an isolated affair, but a parallel project sustained with family resources. The probability that she is denied any extraordinary compensation is extremely high. Furthermore, it allows us to demand partial return of what was diverted. During those days, coexistence at home became a carefully rehearsed choreography. Emily continued with her routine. Jim, 3 times a week, fake literary meetings, visits to David, that I knew in detail. I maintained a measured kindness without abrupt changes that could alert her. I did not increase or decrease physical contact. I did not initiate arguments or sarcastic comments. That apparent normality was my best camouflage. However, internally something was transforming. Every time I heard her laugh on the phone in another room, my indignation tempered and converted into something colder, an absolute conviction that the person sharing my bed did not deserve even a second of improvisation. She deserved a surgical response planned to the millimeter that left her no room to reinterpret facts or dramatize the victim role. Robert's reports continued arriving, although they were no longer strictly necessary from a probationary point of view. I insisted he complete the agreed 45 days. I wanted that. When the day of confrontation arrived, every one of her sentences could be contradicted with a concrete fact, with a schedule, with a photograph, with a bank charge. I wanted her to understand there was no loophole for manipulation. The night of February 28th, while she slept deeply, I got up and leaned on the windowsill of the bedroom window. I looked at the garden I had cared for over years, the trees I planted when Jason was a child, the stone table where we celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and family reunions. None of that would be mine again in physical terms, but curiously, I did not feel nostalgia. What tied me to that space were no longer sincere affections, but memories contaminated by lies. I preferred to start in another place, rather than keep living in a scenario where the play of her deception was performed. That early morning, I took the final decision. The confrontation would take place at home, with Mike present with Jason as witness, when all documentation was formally prepared and the demand ready to be presented the next day. There would be no uncontrolled shouting or thrown objects. There would be lit screens folders on the table, dates, numbers, and guilty silences. Emily would learn perhaps for the first time that her conduct had tangible and immediate consequences. I, on the other hand, had already started living as if I were in another stage. It was like observing my own marriage from outside, seeing clearly the cracked structure that previously hid under layers of habit. And the more I analyzed every movement of the last weeks, the clearer I was that there was no possibility of return. It was not just physical infidelity. It was financial, moral, emotional betrayal. It was absolute contempt for shared history. The preparation was complete. The chessboard I had designed in my mind since that Christmas Eve was ready for the decisive move. It only remained to choose the exact day to flip the game and make clear that, contrary to what Emily thought, the naive one was not me. I chose March 5th, 2024, to tear down the facade. There were no mystical symbolisms or special dates. Simply it was the moment when all pieces were aligned. The sale of the house had been recorded in the property registry. The funds had been safe for weeks in accounts inaccessible to Emily Roberts. File was bound and the divorce demand reviewed to the minimum detail by Mike. It was missing converting all that silent scaffolding into a frontal blow. That morning I called Jason and asked him to come to the house in the afternoon with Sarah. I did not give him many explanations. I only told him it was about something important and delicate that I needed to treat with the closest family. He perceived gravity in my voice and did not insist. I also arranged with Mike to be present at 7 p.m., without robe or formalities, dressed as a friend of the family, although his briefcase would contain more gunpowder than any weapon. To Emily, I simply said I wanted to organize a small family snack, something intimate to talk about future matters. She made a face of strangeness but did not suspect anything. "Has something happened with your health?" she asked, perhaps fearing medical news. "Nothing like that," I replied. "I just want to order certain things while I'm still lucid." Her expression softened almost with tenderness. It was ironic that she interpreted my coldness as concern for tomorrow, when in reality I was contemplating her fall. I spent the morning reviewing the material, once more selected the clearest fragments of the Christmas Eve video, the most compelling photographs, the key pages of bank transfers, and the most revealing quotes from the recordings. It was not necessary to overwhelm anyone with the 240 sheets. A representative sample, accompanied by the notice that there was much more ready to be delivered to the judge, was enough. At 6:30 p.m., I prepared the main living room. I closed curtains, turned on the large format television, and connected my laptop via HDMI cable. I placed 3 folders on the low table, one for Jason and Sarah, another for Mike, another for me. In the air floated a strange calm, almost unreal, like the one preceding a storm announced for weeks. Mike arrived punctual, greeted Emily with moderate kindness, and accepted a coffee. Jason and Sarah appeared 15 minutes later with Luke, who came euphoric with a new toy. I kissed my grandson and gently asked Jason to leave him playing in his old room with the tablet. "What we are going to treat is adult business," I clarified. I was not going to repeat the mistake of exposing him to something that could mark him for life. When we were all seated in the living room, I turned off the background music and positioned myself in front of the television standing. I felt 4 gazes fixed on me. Sarah's curiosity, Jason's worry, Mike's professional attention, and Emily's apparent serenity, who, however, began to frown slightly. "I have gathered you today because I need to tell the truth about something that has been happening in this house for too long." I started with a surprisingly firm voice, and I do not intend to leave room for misunderstandings, nuances, or alternative versions. Emily twisted her mouth in a gesture of discomfort. "William, you are scaring me?" "What are you talking about?" I did not answer immediately. I took the remote control, selected the correct file on the computer, and pressed play. The screen filled with the image of David's living room recorded on Christmas Eve. The angle clearly showed the beige sofa, the warm lighting, and 2 instantly recognizable people. Emily and David kissing with intensity. The silence that followed was absolute. Only the audio of the video could be heard, sighs, laughter, phrases that I already knew by heart. I missed you so much this week. I missed you too, my love. I hate that you have to go back to him. The scene played out with undeniable rawness. Jason stood petrified, staring at the screen without blinking. Sarah brought a hand to her mouth. Mike did not look away professionally, confirming the quality of the material. Emily, on the other hand, turned pale. First, she tried a nervous smile, then she opened her mouth to speak, but no word came out. Her face reflected something I had not seen in 15 months. Genuine surprise. When the video ended, I paused the image on a frame where their faces were very close, illuminated enough so there would be no doubt of their identities. Then I spoke. This was recorded on December 24th, 2023, approximately at 10:30 p.m. While we were all celebrating dinner in this very house, you, Emily, crossed the street to visit your dear neighbor. Our grandson Luke saw you leave. I went after you and decided to record instead of breaking down the door with blows. This is taken out of context, she murmured finally, clinging to the first absurd burning nail she found. You do not know what we were talking about before or after. You can't. I raised a hand to stop her. Do not lie any more. You have been doing it for 15 months, and today you are not going to improvise creative explanations in front of our son. I opened the first folder and handed out copies of the bank statements. Here you have, I continued transfers from our shared account to David's account between October 2022 and November 2023. 14 operations, total amount, $62,300. Concept, friendly loan. Do you want to explain to Jason what kind of friendship requires that level of monthly financing? Jason looked down at the paper's read, dates and amounts, and then raised his eyes toward his mother with a look I had never seen on him. It was not immediate rage, it was something worse. Wounded disbelief. Is this true, Mom? He asked with a hoarse voice. You have been taking money from the account Dad, and you shared for over a year to give it to David. Emily swallowed, completely thrown off. Jason, son, it is not that simple. David was going through a bad financial time, and I was just trying to help. Your father has always been very rigid with money he would not have understood. Mike intervened with polite coldness. The records show that while he was supposedly in a bad time, he bought a high-end car, made 2 trips abroad, and acquired a Swiss watch valued at almost $5,000. Those data appear in the investigation report. They do not seem precisely the expenses of someone on the verge of eviction. I projected on the screen some of the photographs Robert had taken. Emily and David leaving a hotel, hugging, exchanging wrapped gifts, dining in luxurious restaurants. Every image tore down another possible alibi. For months I continued, you lied to my face saying you were at book clubs, supporting relatives with problems, going out with invented friends. Meanwhile, you used my effort accumulated over 40 years to sustain your parallel relationship. It is not just about sex outside of marriage. It is about economic looting, moral disloyalty, and absolute contempt for our history. She tried to get up from the sofa, perhaps with the intention of fleeing to the bathroom or anywhere she could compose herself. I pointed to the armchair with a calm I barely recognized as mine. Do not leave. A part is still missing. I took the printed demand document out of the briefcase. I left it on the table in front of her. Starting today, Emily, our marriage is finished. This is the divorce petition drafted by Mike. It will be presented tomorrow in the corresponding family court. It details everything you have done. The chronology of your meetings, the diverted amounts, the conversations where you planned how to keep part of this house and my investments. Because yes, you also talked about that with David. We have it recorded. Her eyes widened. You cannot do this to me from one day to the next. We have a whole life together, a son, a grandson. What you could not do was destroy that life for 15 months. While smiling at every family meal, I replied, without raising my tone, I am not destroying anything. I am only certifying the death of something you killed, slowly. I mentioned then the point I knew would hit her, where it hurt most, the status. And I want you to understand something essential well. The house where you are sitting is no longer yours or mine. It was sold on February 14th to an investment company for $8,900,000. The money is in an individual account in my name, along with the inherited investments. Legally, you do not have the right to a single penny of that wealth, because the home was separate property, and the investments too. The only thing that will be discussed will be the joint accounts from which I already withdrew my legitimate part. Emily put her hands to her head. You are crazy. You cannot have sold the house without telling me. That is illegal. Mike spoke then with surgeon-like precision. The property was registered solely in William's name since 1998 as paternal inheritance. Under the separate property regime, he could dispose of it without requiring your signature. The operation is perfectly legal and registered. Any attempt to challenge it will be sterile, especially in light of this file. Jason, who had remained in shock during the entire exchange, finally reacted. Mom, did you really plan to divorce Dad and keep part of what my grandparents left him while you were with David? She extended her hands toward her son, seeking contact. Jason, I got confused. I felt alone. Your father was always in his things. 15 months of confusion financed with more than $60,000 is not a slip, he exploded, finally standing up. It is a parallel project. It is an alternative life, and you built it on top of ours. I did not intervene. That answer did not need reinforcement. I limited myself to closing the folder with the dossier. The revelation phase was complete. From that instant, what would follow was no longer effective negotiation, but administration of consequences. After that display of evidence, the living room remained impregnated with a dense, almost physical silence. Emily breathed with difficulty, as if the air had become thick. Her eyes went from the divorce document to the frozen images on the screen, then to Jason's serious face, and finally to mine, looking for some crack of pity that no longer existed. We can talk about this alone, she tried to stammer, clinging to the idea of a private conversation where she could manipulate emotions better. It is not necessary to expose our life this way in front of everyone. It was precisely necessary, I replied, keeping the tone low, because for more than a year you had two lives, one public as an exemplary wife and another clandestine paid for with this family's effort. Today those two versions have met. There will be no more closed doors for you to adjust the story. Mike closed his briefcase with a deliberate gesture. Emily, he said with distant courtesy, legally, you have the right to independent advice. It is recommended that you look for your own lawyer as soon as possible. The demand we will present tomorrow includes the possibility of an agreement if you accept the terms and recognize the facts. If you decide to deny everything, the procedure will be longer and more painful, but the result with this level of documentation will be the same. She looked at him with contempt. Of course, that is what he pays you for, to destroy me. You do not need help for that, I answered without apparent resentment. You managed alone for 15 months. Jason was still standing with his hands on his head, walking slowly on the carpet, as if trying to process every image again. Sarah, sitting on the edge of the sofa, did not let go of the papers she had received. Her fingers were trembling. Did you plan to tell me at some point? Jason asked his mother without raising his voice. Or was your plan to divorce Dad when David was comfortable and well-funded? Your father was never truly present, she replied, clinging to her victim script. He was always locked in that office, obsessed with his numbers and his projects. I needed to feel alive. David listened to me. He made me feel desired. You are not a perfect father, William. Do not pretend now. I smiled barely, without humor. I am not perfect, certainly, but I have not used joint accounts to support a lover. I have not invented imaginary book clubs. nor dragged your sister Betty's name through the mud to justify absences. I have not lied in front of our grandson while planning to empty part of an inheritance that came from my parents. Mentioning her seemed to awaken another unease. Emily frowned. Do you plan to tell the whole family? Turn me into a spectacle for your brothers, your friends, the neighbors. I specified to tell the truth to whoever needs to know it when the topic arises. I do not plan to cover this with sugar-coated versions to protect your reputation. You wanted to live as if you were single. Now you will have to assume what that implies in the eyes of those who knew you as William's wife. Mike intervened again, this time with a strictly technical tone. Regarding the material situation, it is convenient to clarify certain points from today. William no longer legally resides in this home. For legal purposes, he is a mere temporary occupant through consent of the new owners. The house must be vacated within a maximum period of 60 days, according to the deed. William has already foreseen where to settle. It would be advisable that you also start looking for a place according to your new economic reality. Emily blinked, stunned. And what am I supposed to pay with? I dedicated my life to the home. I gave up many things. You cannot leave me on the street as if I were a nobody. You will have, I clarified the part that corresponds to you, from the joint accounts, discounting what you diverted to David. That is approximately half of the remaining funds, once the $62,300 you transferred without consent are compensated. You can also claim alimony, although with your recent history, and at your age it is likely that the judge will be very prudent about it. You will not be destitute, but you will not continue living at a level financed by someone you have systematically betrayed. A turn occurred then that I had foreseen because I knew Emily better than she thought. She went from the victim role to the offensive accuser. And you, Jason, she shot, looking at him with red eyes. Are you going to allow your father to corner me this way? I am your mother. I was with you when you had a fever, when you broke your arm playing soccer, when I helped you with every school project. Are you really going to take his side in all this as if I were a criminal? My son's face twitched. You are not a criminal, Mom, but you have done something very serious. I cannot pretend this is a small stumble. You have deceived Dad for more than a year. You used money from both for another man, and you planned to break this marriage when it suited you. What did you expect me to do? Applaud. I did it because I was empty, she sobbed, clinging to the back of the sofa. Your father gave me a roof and security? Yes, but for years he has not looked at me as a woman. David gave me back that sensation. It was not just interest in his situation, and you, William, are not a saint either. You always believed yourself superior to everyone with your order, your discipline. Maybe I conceded. I have been distant at times. Maybe I took refuge in work and then in my books, but none of that justifies you turning this house into a branch of a double life. If you lacked something, you could ask for it. You could separate cleanly. What you could not do was mount a sentimental and economic project behind everyone's back, while smiling in every Christmas photo. At that point, Sarah intervened with a soft but firm voice, breaking the dynamic of direct confrontation between the three of us. Emily, she said, I love you as a mother-in-law, and I have always respected you, but what you have done has put me in an impossible position. How am I going to explain to Luke in a few years that his grandmother used her own house as a hideout to see the neighbor while he played upstairs? Because that child is not dumb. Sooner or later he will understand what happened. Luke's name fell like a stone in the center of the conversation. Emily collapsed a little more in the armchair. I do not want him to hate me, she murmured. You should have thought about that when you crossed the street on Christmas Eve, I replied with contained hardness. It was him at 8 years old who had more integrity than any of the adults present here. He told me because he felt that what he saw was not right. He was more loyal to me in a whisper than you in 15 months of coexistence. During the following minutes, the conversation shifted to concrete aspects, provisional distribution of expenses until leaving the house, regulated access to documents she still kept, contacts with her own lawyer. Mike took note of every point, establishing verbal agreements that he would later put in writing. It was not just about emotions, but logistics. Who would sleep where? Starting from what date, how, and when would the situation be communicated to Betty and the rest of the family? At what moment would we talk to Luke in a way adapted to his age? When I finally adjourned the informal session, the atmosphere was charged but clear. Nothing had been left floating in the realm of insinuations. I approached Jason and put a hand on his shoulder. I want you to understand something with absolute precision, I told him. What happens between your mother and me as a couple ends here. I am not going to ask you to hate her or remove her from your life. But there is a limit I do not intend to negotiate. I am not going to support Emily financially after all this. If you decide to help her with your money, it is your choice. But do not mix my resources in that support. I will not see a single dollar of mine directed to her again. He nodded slowly, looking me in the eyes. I understand. I need time to assimilate everything, but I understand. And I promise you, I will never use Luke as currency in this conflict. That sentence, more than any of the previous ones, confirmed to me that although my marriage had imploded, something in the next generation still stood. We had failed as a couple, but we could still try not to fail completely, as parents and grandparents. When Mike left and Jason and Sarah went with Luke, I was left alone with Emily in a living room I no longer felt was mine. She was sitting with her back hunched, her dress slightly wrinkled, her makeup run by tears. "And now what am I supposed to do?" she murmured without looking at me. "Whatever you want," I replied, picking up the folder and turning off the screen. "But do it without me, and above all, do it with your own pocket. The lesson this leaves you is simple. You can play with other people's feelings for a while, but playing with a lifetime of effort has a price. You just discovered it." There were no more words that night. She went up alone to the bedroom. I slept in the guest room for the first time since we moved into that house. It was also the last time I slept under that roof. While closing my eyes, I felt with absolute clarity that an entire stage was left behind, not because of an outburst, but by a series of cold decisions that deep down were nothing other than a proportional response to the coldness with which Emily had calculated her betrayal. I definitely abandoned that house 3 days after the meeting of March 5th, 2024. I did not wait for the 60 days of courtesy agreed with the buying company to pass. For me, that place had transformed into an empty set, a stage contaminated by adulterated memories. I got up early on March 8th. I loaded the 2 suitcases I had prepared weeks before and left without making noise. Emily remained in the bedroom. I vaguely heard the shower water. I did not want theatrical goodbyes or final scenes. I closed the door with the same calm with which a concluded project is closed. Mike had helped me rent temporarily a discreet penthouse in a quiet uptown neighborhood, furnished with clean views and silence enough to hear my own thoughts. I did not need luxury. I needed distance. The emotional move was simpler than I would have imagined months ago. With me, I took boxes with documentation, some books, 3 photo albums, where despite everything, there were still images of authentic stages and few other belongings. The rest, including furniture dishes and decorative memories, I left behind, like empty shells are left behind. The following days were marked by a strange mixture of paperwork and silence. Mike presented the divorce demand on March 9th, attaching the complete file. That same day, Emily received the official notification at the old home, along with a requirement to answer within the legal term. I know that the impression of the judicial seal on her name had to be more devastating than any phrase said in the living room. Jason came to see me at the new apartment the second Sunday after my departure. He arrived alone without Sarah or Luke, perhaps to avoid the child associating the place with conflict instead of associating it with his grandfather. He wore a tired expression as if he had aged 5 years and 10 days. "Are you settling in well?" he asked, while looking around the living room, sober but cozy. More than enough for me, I replied. I have lived in worse places when I started my career. This is almost a luxury compared to those years. He sat in front of me with a long sigh. I have spoken several times with Mom since that night. She is undone, but also I do not know how to explain it. She still tries to justify things. She says she did not want to hurt you, that she only sought affection, that everything got out of hand. It does not surprise me, I commented. She has been building her own story for so long that she cannot tear it down at once. Do not expect her to suddenly recognize every lie and every selfish decision as if she were reciting a police report. Her moral survival depends on sugarcoating what she did. Jason looked down. The hardest thing for me has been not becoming a judge. I am your son, but I am also her son. I care for both of you, and what you have done, each in your way, has had a direct impact on my life. I cannot cut ties with Mom from one day to the next, but I cannot look the other way with what I saw in that living room. I am not asking you to cut her out of your life, I clarified slowly. The only thing I asked you, and I repeat it so there are no confusions, is that you do not mix my resources in her new reality. Your relationship with her as a mother is your business. My responsibility is to set a limit between who destroyed a marriage for me and my own future as an individual. He nodded. I am clear on that. In fact, she has tried to get me to go with her to talk to a lawyer friend of hers to see other perspectives. But I refused. I told her that on this issue I cannot become her representative. I need her to understand she crossed a line. There was a moment of comfortable silence. Then he added, Luke has asked why you no longer live in the same house. We told him that the grandparents had decided to live in different places because they argued a lot. I do not know how long that explanation will hold. What is necessary for him to be prepared to hear something closer to reality? I replied. For now, it is enough for me that he knows I am still his grandfather and that I will not disappear. The rest will adjust with time. Parallel to those family conversations, the judicial process took its course. Emily's lawyer presented a response trying to soften the facts. He spoke of an extramarital, affective relationship started in a context of crisis, denied relevant economic character to the transfers, and mentioned sacrifices she had made for the family to claim significant alimony. However, the evidence Mike attached, dates amounts, recordings, where she explained to David how she thought to secure a part of the house, and investments dismantled every one of those statements. There was a preliminary hearing in early April. Emily attended, accompanied by her counsel. I attended with Mike. Seeing her again in a judicial building sitting on the other side of the room was shocking, not because of nostalgia, but because of the contrast. She wore a sober suit, discreet makeup, the same woman I knew decades ago, but behind that image was another story written in figures and dates. When the judge reviewed the summary of the file, his frown deepened immediately. A process of prolonged infidelity, with an evident patrimonial component, is accredited, he pointed out after listening to Mike expose. The transfers, the financing of expenses outside the family nucleus, and the declarations collected in audio are clear. This conditions any extraordinary compensation claim. Emily's lawyer tried to argue that she had contributed to the sustenance of the home for years, that she had given up a teaching career to support my professional development. No one denied it. I was the first to recognize that her work during Jason's formative decades was essential, but Mike knew how to draw the line. No one discusses her role in the past, Your Honor. What is in question is her conduct during the last 15 months, a period in which she not only broke marital trust, but used common resources to sustain a third party. Those acts cannot be erased by invoking sacrifices from 30 years ago. The room remained in silence while the judge took notes. Upon leaving the court, I briefly crossed gazes with Emily. There was tiredness in her eyes, perhaps also resentment. I did not approach. In another time, I would have consoled her after a tense situation. Now each walked in opposite directions. Personally, that period also meant an internal readjustment. I began to reorganize my days without the weight of coexistence. I went back to walking in the park in the mornings. I resumed readings I had pending. I reordered my files with maniacal patience. It was not about filling gaps with activities, but about building a routine where the role of husband no longer existed. That place in my identity had emptied, and paradoxically, that opened a space for rest. I did not have to watch or suspect or hide my own movements. The silent war was over. Now it was about managing the armistice. Luke began visiting me some Saturdays. We played chess on the living room table. He insisted on learning complicated openings. I taught him first to protect the king. If you lose it, you lose everything else, I told him. It was not a sought metaphor, but inevitably resonated with what was lived. I never mentioned David in front of him. If one day he needed to know more, I preferred the story to reach him when he had emotional tools to process it. Meanwhile, indirect news of Emily's life reached me through comments Jason could not avoid. Her old social circle had shrunk. Some friends pulled away as soon as they knew details of what happened. Others chose to stay neutral. What hit her hardest, as I was told, was David's reaction when he understood that the money from the house was not going to be within his reach. In one of the later recordings Robert managed to obtain, and that Mike presented as an additional annex, David was heard saying, "I did not think your husband was going to move so fast. Without the security of good compensation, I do not know if this plan makes sense." Emily tried to convince him that something could be rescued, but it was evident he was already recalculating his priorities. The same person for whom she had risked a marriage of decades was now recalculating the value of keeping her by his side without extraordinary economic backing. That part did not produce satisfaction for me, but a bitter realization. She had not only betrayed, she had also been deceived on another layer, although by her own will. She believed she was building an effective refuge, and in reality, she built a structure on sand. In late April, when the procedure was already on track and only technical questions remained to be resolved, I sighted Jason alone in a quiet cafeteria. I wanted to seal something that was essential for me. I am going to tell you this once I started looking directly into his eyes, so similar to mine in my youth. There will be no reconciliation. There will not be one now or in 5 years or in 10. I do not want you to live with the sensation that perhaps one day your parents will get back together. That is not going to happen. I do not wish to recover that bond. What broke was not just trust, it was respect. And without respect, there is no foundation that holds. He nodded in silence, and far from looking dejected, he seemed calmer. I thank you for saying it like that, without detours. It is hard, but I prefer clarity to false hopes. The family I added does not disappear because a marriage ends. You will continue being my son. Luke will continue being my grandson. If you choose to maintain the relationship with your mother, and I think you should do it with the limits, you consider you will not have to justify yourself to me. Just remember the line I marked for you about money. For the rest, I am not going to turn our relationship into a battlefield. We left that talk with a silent pact. He would not be a hostage of our story, and I would not accept crumbs disguised as affection under any concept again. I had learned through blows that at a certain age, one is no longer there to try to repair the irreparable, but to protect with energy what can still be saved. Dignity, serenity, coherence with oneself. At that moment, the final details of the divorce and Emily's definitive move still remained to be resolved, but my internal decision was sealed. The betrayal had a long, cold, and calculated course. My response, although different in form, had been equally firm, and from then on, any approach she attempted would find a closed door, not out of impulsive resentment, but out of mature conviction that there are damages that do not admit turning back. The practical consequences for Emily did not take long to become visible much before the judge dictated the final sentence. The old home had an eviction deadline set contractually for mid-May 2024. The investment company planned to completely renovate it and put it up for luxury rental, so there was no margin for sentimental extensions. Mike received the formal notice from the parent society and forwarded it to me, and I in turn passed it to Emily through her lawyer without adornments or drama. She had tried at first to cling to that house as a last status symbol. I knew it from Jason's comments, who debated between filial compassion and legal evidence. Mom says she cannot conceive living in a small apartment, he told me in one of our conversations. She is convinced that at least that house should remain hers for everything she has gone through there. I could only answer with a sentence that summarized my position. One thing is what one believes they deserve, and another very different one is what reality recognizes. In early May, Emily was forced to face that reality. With the intervention of her lawyer, she accepted an intermediate agreement regarding liquid money. It was recognized that part of the funds in the joint accounts also came from her years of work as a teacher, but the exact amount she had transferred to David was meticulously discounted, including minimum interests calculated on that capital during the investigated period. In the end, she was assigned a figure somewhat above $350,000, enough to restart in a decent environment, but far from the standard of living she had enjoyed as the wife of a man with millionaire inherited assets. With that amount, she rented a medium-sized apartment in a less exclusive neighborhood. Jason helped her find something safe and decent, but respected the limit we had fixed. None of my resources came into play in that move. The furniture from the old house was mostly sold at bargain prices or remained as part of the deal with the investment company. The great living room where silver anniversaries, birthdays, and meetings were celebrated, including that confrontation on March 5th, was empty in a matter of days. The family photos that decorated hallways and shelves ended up stored in boxes. Some ended up in my penthouse, others stayed in Jason's hands, and I do not know how many ended up in anonymous containers. While she reorganized her existence in that new space, the relationship with David eroded rapidly. The dynamic changed as soon as it became clear that there would be no distribution of a mansion nor access to investments. The man who for 15 months had showered her with compliments and promises began to show himself distant. He reduced meetings, made work, excuses, avoided long-term plans. Jason told me with a mixture of sadness and bitter relief that his mother came to say a revealing phrase. It seems that without the house and without the financial cushion, David no longer looks at me the same. The phrase contained more recognition of reality than she was capable of admitting openly. I did not gloat in that fall. By then my affective bond with Emily was so broken that what happened in her new love life was almost irrelevant to me. What I did observe with lucidity was the pattern someone who had used without shame. The effort of another to sustain a fantasy ended up suffering similar treatment by the man she idealized. It was not poetic justice in the romantic sense, but a kind of moral symmetry difficult to ignore. In parallel, my daily life was settling into quieter rhythms. The uptown penthouse began to seem like a home, although reduced. I bought a robust wooden table for the dining room, placed 3 framed photographs in the living room that represented something genuine for me. An image of Jason as a child on the beach, another of Luke holding his first school trophy, and a third of my parents, young the day they signed the deed of the house I had sold. I did not do it out of real estate nostalgia, but as a reminder of origin. All that capital I now protected had not fallen from the sky. It came from a chain of work and sacrifices that I was not going to allow anyone to undermine again. The judicial procedure advanced faster than usual, thanks to the forcefulness of the file, since finally the lawyers opted to close a regulatory agreement before reaching a long trial. Emily formally renounced any claim on the inherited assets, accepted the agreed amount from the joint accounts, and a moderate and temporary alimony of limited duration, oriented more to facilitate her transition than to sustain her indefinitely. The judge approved the agreement in late June 2024, and the divorce was registered shortly after. From that moment, our interactions were reduced to what was strictly necessary, and always through third parties or email. There were no reconciliation scenes or furtive meetings to talk about the past. If at some moment she fed that hope, I did not know it, because I never opened the door in that direction again. The only time we coincided physically after the sentence was at a school event for Luke in November. We greeted each other with a brief gesture without a kiss on the cheek or subsequent conversation. We were two older people sharing a grandson, nothing more. However, there was a decision that definitively marked the new family configuration. In midsummer, Emily tried to get Jason to intercede, so I would help her face a series of expenses that, as she explained, she had not foreseen. Rental deposit purchase of basic furniture, some overdue payments. She suggested that perhaps he could ask me for a bridge loan, taking advantage of the fact that I was so well situated. When Jason transferred it to me, he did it almost with shame. "I am only going to ask you once because I want it to be clear," he said while we drank coffee in my living room. "Mom thinks you could give her some economic support beyond what the agreement marks. She says that deep down you know that without you, she would not have had that standard of living all these years." I did not need to elaborate a complicated answer. She had that standard of living because I built it and decided to share it. While a pact of respect existed, I answered. That pact was broken. The agreement we signed already contemplates more than what many judges would have granted in her situation. Any additional help would be in practice canceling the only real consequence of her acts, and I am not willing to do that. If you want to support her with your money, you are in your right. But my part ended the day I signed that sentence. Jason kept silence for a few moments. Then he nodded with a seriousness that reminded me of the responsible boy he had been as a teenager. "Then I will explain it to her like that, without adornments, that what she has is what there is, and that from now on every dollar that enters her life will depend on her decisions, not yours. I do not seek to punish her forever," I added. "Just mark a before and after. For more than 30 years, any of her problems ended up being resolved because I was behind covering gaps. That stage is over. If she does not learn anything from what happened, all this will have served for nothing." While Emily dealt with that new reality, David practically vanished from her environment. One day he stopped calling her, another, he stopped answering messages. Later he communicated to her, as I learned, that he did not see himself building a life in common under so much family and economic pressure. In other words, without a mansion, without investments, and with the social stigma that a scandal of this type always drags in a neighborhood, the relationship lost charm. In a matter of weeks, that passion for which she was willing to dynamite a marriage of decades was reduced to telephone silence and some empty excuse sent by message. The circle closed without me needing to lift a finger. I was not the one who separated her from that man. It was he who recalculated costs and benefits and decided the bet was no longer worth it. That realization, far from producing joy, reinforced an idea I had been ruminating for a long time. Whoever betrays with such cold blood someone who has given them everything sooner or later discovers that the accomplice also has a price, and when money disappears from the equation, many supposed love stories show their true skeleton. Emotionally, I did not feel like a winner of anything. A divorce, even when fair and necessary, does not leave a sensation of triumph. It leaves holes, changes of habits, adjustments in the look upon oneself. But there was something that gave me a peace I did not expect at my 64 years. The certainty of not having let myself be dragged into the mud. I could have resorted to shouting childish revenge, humiliating public exhibitions. Instead, I opted for the slowest and roughest way. Investigate, document, plan, execute every step with a cold head. Deep down, that was my true response to betrayal, not becoming what I had suffered. She chose the easy lie and the emotional shortcut financed with other people's money. I chose the long route of clarity and consequence, even if it implied staying alone in a smaller penthouse, with less noise around, but with a clean conscience. And that choice, more than any figure, was the one that marked the difference between ending up destroyed or simply transformed. July 2024 arrived silent, without great celebrations or marked dates, but for me, it meant the real closing of a cycle. The divorce sentence was already registered, the accounts separated the old house occupied by workers, tearing down walls and ripping up floors. Every time I passed by a car on that street, I saw containers full of rubble, where before there was furniture I knew by heart. I did not feel the stab that many would have expected. What was being physically demolished, there was not my home, but the set of a life that had ceased to exist long before. My new routine in the penthouse consolidated in a few months. I got up early, made coffee in a simple pot, not that Italian one I already associated with another stage, and opened the windows to let in the morning light. I resumed hobbies. I had parked slow reading of historical essays, writing personal notes I never thought would become a coherent story, long walks through the same park where years ago I took Jason by bicycle. Without realizing it, I was rebuilding an existence in which my value did not depend on being anyone's husband, but on the way I managed my own solitude. Luke adapted with a speed that at first surprised me, and later I understood. Children have an extraordinary capacity to normalize changes if adults do not turn them into constant battles. He came to see me on alternate weekends. We played chess, watched soccer games, cooked omelets that always came out too thick. Sometimes he asked about his grandmother, and I answered him with honesty filtered by his age. She lives in another apartment now. She's organizing her life. But she loves you very much. I added nothing more. I knew that when he was older he would put the pieces together on his own, and I preferred him to remember that even wounded his grandfather refused to poison him against anyone. With Jason, the relationship entered a more adult phase. He stopped seeing me as an immovable figure and began to look at me as a man who had fallen and gotten up without making theater of his fall. He came to dinner some Fridays without Sarah or Luke, and we talked about topics we had never touched. Mistakes of mine in education that I now recognize, pressures he felt as a young man, work decisions. I took thinking of the family without asking if they really wanted them. His mother's betrayal paradoxically forced both of us out of rigid roles of provider-father and receiver-son. We were two adults trying not to repeat patterns of silence that had done so much damage. Of Emily, I knew just enough. I knew she was still in the rented apartment, that she had started giving private language lessons to teenagers to complement what she received from the agreement and savings, that some friendships had turned their backs on her upon knowing details of what happened, and that others had decided to stay neutral due to the discomfort such a conflict always generates. Of David, barely echoes arrived. He tried at first to maintain sporadic visits, but with time he moved away completely. The neighborhood ended up seeing him as the gray figure who broke someone else's marriage without assuming real cost. He who had enjoyed so much being a lover in the shadows found that in full light he was not so attractive without the aura of the forbidden and without the economic cushion he imagined. On some occasion, Betty commented to me that Emily recognized in a low voice having made a mistake in the forms. That formulation always caught my attention. She did not say she made a mistake in betraying, but in the way of managing that betrayal. It was deep down a way of admitting that the consequences weighed more on her than the act itself. At this point, it was no longer up to me to evaluate to what extent she had learned something deep or just regretted having lost a comfortable position. I was no longer her judge, nor her husband, nor her economic protector. I was simply a figure from the past with whom she shared a son and a grandson. Sometimes at night, when turning off the lights of the apartment, I mentally reviewed the complete sequence since that Christmas Eve of 2023 when Luke tugged on my sleeve. I saw myself standing by the window of David's house with the mobile recording, my heart agitated and my mind taking a crucial decision, reacting with my head instead of my hands. If that night I had burst into the living room, shouting perhaps I would have obtained a confession between tears, a feigned forgiveness, a few months of tense calm before everything rotted again. I would have lost the house in a hasty distribution. They would have blamed me for exaggerating an affair. I would have ended up as a resentful old man. I chose the opposite. Shut up, observe document act only when every movement was insured. It was not an easy path. There were nights of insomnia, days of contained rage, moments when I would have liked to be younger, to start from scratch, with the feeling of having decades ahead. But at my 64 years, I understood something fundamental. It is not about how many years are left, but how they are lived, and above all, with what level of respect toward oneself that final stretch is transited. The betrayal had no forgiveness, not because I was not capable of feeling compassion, but because forgiving in this case would have meant accepting that what she did was in essence bearable, and it was not. Forgiving would have implied opening the door again to someone who demonstrated, with figures and facts, that she was willing to empty accounts, lie to the face of the whole family, and plan a future with another on the remains of my effort. I could not, nor did I want to build an old age supported by such a person. I preferred to sustain myself in dignified solitude than accompanied by someone who had demonstrated converting love into a tool of convenience. To whoever listens to my story, perhaps it draws attention that I speak so little of overflowing feelings and so much of numbers, deeds, deadlines, strategies. It is deliberate. The sentimental pain I had, of course. But if I learned something, it is that the worst part of a betrayal is not the foreign kiss, but the hand in the wallet and the use of your trust as a key to loot what you built, with decades of consistency. That is why my response was mathematical, notarial, legal. Not because my heart did not hurt, but because I understood that if I did not protect the material, too, the emotional wound would take ahead, not only my present, but the future of those who come behind. Today I can say without great eloquence that I came out whole. Marked, yes, more distrustful too, but whole. I keep what I inherited from my parents, not only in dollars, but in principles. Not living at the expense of another, not justifying the unjustifiable, not asking for compassion while one sticks knives. Luke will grow up knowing that his grandfather, faced with a brutal betrayal, did not crawl or lose his head, but stood firm, took care of what was his, and did not let resentment turn him into a caricature of himself. The price Emily paid was high. She lost comfort, neighborhood prestige, the illusion of an interested love, and the certainty of always having a net under her feet. Mine was different. I renounced the illusion of an eternal couple, the romantic idea of growing old, next to the same person, certain memories that I can no longer look at without seeing their dark reverse. But in exchange, I gained something that at my age is worth more than any mansion, the quiet conviction of having set clear limits when it was time of not having allowed someone else's lack of scruples to define the end of my story. And above all, I understood that although one cannot avoid being betrayed, one can decide what to do with that stab. I chose not to return it in the same coin, but to cut the link, close the economic tap, and move on. Because there are wounds that heal and others that must not be closed completely, to remember why, from a certain point, there are doors that must never be opened again.